Hello fellow drum enthusiasts and hobbyists. Today we're going to cut some bearing edges. I'm going to show you guys how to cut regular standard 45-degree bearing edges. The subject matter is this here former floor tom shell that's going to become a bass drum that in a previous video I cut down from 16 to 14 inches depth. Now we're going to cut the bearing edges on the edge that I cut it. So the first thing you want to do is to set the height of the 45-degree bit. I set it just by eyesight, and then I do a quick test cut on any piece of wood, and that tells me that I'm still a bit short, which is better than going too deep to begin with. The one thing to keep in mind through this whole process is that you don't want to exceed, you don't want to take off any of the height of the shell, because if you do, you're going to start gradually going downward in a spiraling kind of form and your drum won't be square anymore, because there's going to be the step where it skips down a step because you're using this as the base for the straightness. In my case, because I do things a little bit slipshotty, this is not square anyway, so I am actually going to go a little deeper than you should, but just by a smidge. We're talking less than a hair, and I am going to intentionally spiral downward just a wee little bit so that I can actually square up the drum as I cut the bearing edge, which means it's not going to be entirely square, but it's going to be more square than it is now, and the wee little bit of unsquareness, which is only going to be, like I said, less than a quarter of a millimeter. That's still better than an entry-level factory drum kit, and some intermediate kits even. And I can even that out even more when I do the final sanding of the bearing edge, making it really close to perfect. So, without further ado, so I've set the bit height. It's a little bit less than what I'm going to end up in the end, but I prefer doing that and then taking a bit more off, because that also prevents the wood from tearing. A small router table like this isn't ideal. If you want to be a professional drum maker, you need a bigger router table, and you need a router that spins faster than this one. But for hobby purposes and for doing drum stuff for fun, this will do the job. With a smaller router table, the thing to keep in mind is that with a bigger router table, it's much easier to keep the piece you're working on flush with the table, the bigger the table is. When you have a smaller table like this, you have to really pay attention to what little contact surface you have and make sure that you're making good contact all the time. So I'm going to adjust this drill bit up a little bit and then continue on. So here you can see how much higher I've set the router bit compared to before, where it was here. And I'm going to go another pass, which should get me very close to that edge, and then I should be able to start a slight downward spiral when I cut the outside bevel. Always keep in mind, see those ear protectors? Routers make a very loud screaming sound when you're physically beside one, so take care of your ears, folks. it turns out. I still have to go a wee bit deeper, so I've raised the bit height just a wee bit more. And just to repeat what I said earlier, if you do start with a nice square shell, then you definitely don't want to take off the entire peak. There always has to be a little left of the original peak if you want to keep that squareness. If you take it off, then you have to square it up. Our inside bearing edge. For the outside bevel, we set the bit height significantly lower, as you can see from this little test cut I did. This is very soft plywood, so the bearing actually made an indentation in it too, but you see that tiny little bevel there? That's about what we need. So now I'm going to cut the outside bevel of the bearing edge. Our finished bearing edge, and now it's pretty much square by doing the inside first and then hitting the outside, because the bearing on the router bit won't allow the bit to get closer to the shell than it actually is. So we're not taking off all the way to the edge, we're still keeping a little piece of the peak. So not only does that square up the formerly not perfectly squared up shell, but it gives us a nice and perfect peak as well. Now I'm just going to sand this down. And we sand it not at all for any reason to do with the shape, but just to make it nice and butter smooth for visual and for ease of tuning. If you have a nice butter smooth edge, then your head glides nicely over it and it doesn't tune in like little steps, but rather smoothly, gradually tunes. I put the paper very forward on here because we're going to be doing this inside like this, so that way I'm catching the edges with the sandpaper. So that's all there is to it now. dance I did at the end is just to soften the sharp peak just ever so slightly. So take a look at those edges, not bad, huh? For backyard, cut it down with a table saw and then cut the bearing edges with a little home router table. Not too shabby. And then I'm going to present the existing edges. That's all there is to it. That's how you cut regular 45 inside with a 45 outside bevel bearing edges. Maybe not super pro. I mean, it's not going to be good enough for boutique drums, but if you're just a hobbyist that like to fix drums or change the configuration of drums or whatever, then these bearing edges, like I said, they're as good as any beginner kit and sometimes rival the odd intermediate kit. It's all about patience. Take your time and do it right.